All right, good morning, everybody, for the first full day of the Aspen Ideas Festival 2025. I'm Graham Veazey, the executive director and the executive producer for the 2025 festival. We're thrilled to have you here. Last night was such a great way to kick off the festival with the opening session between Fareed Zakaria and Walter Isaacson, and then also the amazing poet and musician who's part of the 2025 class of Aspen Ideas Fellows. So a few things to remind folks. When in doubt, think pink. And we've got a great group of people who want to answer your questions, point you in the right directions. So if you see somebody with a pink lanyard, feel free to go and ask them where a particular venue is. The other thing is we've had cancellations in terms of different people that are stuck in Washington, D.C. for legislative issues. So check the app. The app has the answer. So that's a really key point. Today we're kicking off workshops. We're really excited to do that at 11. But I've gotten the question time and again about, is the content going to be available online? Because we have concurrent sessions. So the answer is yes. Not only do we put most of the sessions, about 99% of it on YouTube, but we've got a great podcast called Aspen Ideas to Go. And we've got over 500 episodes, over 6 million downloads. And what's really great is we just announced last night a deal with PRX, one of the great distributors of podcasts internationally. And so we'll be able to continue to amplify the important conversations that happen on stage here to the world. I mentioned the workshops, 11 a.m. We've got Chowza. Terry and Adam are a partner artistic group. They've got Charm Valley, which is the 7 pieces in front of Paepcke. And it's about finding a safe place to find dialogue and common ground. And so they're going to be giving a workshop at 11 a.m. that is going to be in the Madeline Albright Pavilion. And then the work is going to move after the festival. We've got a partnership with the city of Aspen, and in Francis Whitaker Park, which is at the end of Restaurant Row, the Charm Valley will move for the rest of the summer. And Francis Whitaker was a great blacksmith who died in the 90s. And so it's going to be part of the Aspen Ideas Festival that allows people to enjoy what you're enjoying all summer long. We're also really excited to have the conversation today for the General Assembly reflect the first conversation that happened in 1949. And that was all around design and architecture. Herbert was in conversation with Eero Saarinen. Eero Saarinen designed the first tent in 1949. Walter Paepcke commissioned him to do that. And so each day we're going to be having a tribute to that history, but then tie the relevance into the conversation. The last housekeeping note is a reminder that tonight, evenings at Ideas Festival will kick off at 5. That's in Marble Garden Village. We've got our first culinary conversation, which is going to be with Christina Tosi, the CEO and founder of Milk Bar. We'll also have some awesome Milk Bar snacks. We'll have an open bar, Justin wines, mocktails, delicious food. And then we'll go into the conversation at 6:30, and that's going to be Jason Reynolds in conversation with Krista Tippett. It's going to be one not to miss. And then we'll have 2 options. At 7:30, Tamar Gendler will be in Cocktails and Conversation, Counterpoint, with Sam Kimbriel, who's the head of our Philosophy and Society program. But then also at the Wheeler at 7:45, in a collaboration with Anthropocene Magazine, we're doing a series of discussions, musical interventions, animations, and then a dialogue with Vishaan Chakrabarti and David Keith. So a ton to take in today. We're so thrilled that you're all here. Thank you for being part of the festival. And before we have the discussion around design, we're going to see a short film about Herbert, who designed our campus from 1953 to 1973. Let's take a look.
One of the first and most significant decisions Walter Paepcke made when enacting his grand plan for Aspen was to invite Austrian-born architect, artist, and designer Herbert Bayer to town. After studying at the Bauhaus under luminaries like Kandinsky and Klee, Bayer became an influential figure in the Bauhaus movement until, like so many others, he was forced to flee Nazi Germany in the late 1930s. By 1946, he was an American citizen and contracted by Paepcke's container company to produce designs for the company's marketing material. When the Paepckes invited Bayer and his family to visit their new project in Aspen, it was decided that Bayer would be the perfect person to help achieve their goal of rebuilding Aspen. When Bayer agreed, they got to work. Bayer began by rebuilding the Wheeler Opera House and the Hotel Jerome. He fixed up the old Victorian homes in the area and designed brochures and advertisements for the skiing company. His vision touched everything in town. He also helped organize the Goethe Bicentennial, which led to the Aspen Design Conference. His most significant contribution, though, came when he was tasked with designing the campus for the newly created Aspen Institute for Humanistic Studies in 1950. For the next 20 years, he spent his time meticulously planning every inch of the 40-acre campus. Whether it's the Bauhaus-style buildings or Anderson Park, Bayer's work is everywhere you look. To learn more about Bayer's work and art, you can visit the Resnick Center for Herbert Bayer Studies right here on campus. And the next time you find yourself looking out over the landscape, remember that Bayer's vision helped bring all the beauty around you to life.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Michael Kimmelman, and it's a pleasure to be here and on this great campus with Shigeru, Annabelle, and Michael, three of our most important and fascinating and creative architects. And it's great to start with Bayer. I would just say, if you want to know the answer to the question of why architecture matters, which is really at the heart of our conversation this morning, think about where you are, the extent to which everything around you, everything you experience, whether it's conscious or not, is on some level a product of the work that Bayer and others did to create this space. So I'm going to give a little preamble, which is I'm hopefully will get these guys to react and tell me how stupid it is. But I also want to then, so you're familiar with their work, because I know some of you out here are designers and architects, and many of you are not. So to introduce each of them in turn, and then we're going to have a conversation among ourselves. So my little preamble is basically this, that I think, like politics and fashion and many other things, there's a really kind of interesting pendulum quality to the way ideas and creativity and forces flow. And, you know, Bayer was a Bauhaus figure. If you go back to that era a century ago and a little less, you know, there was a generally shared understanding, certainly here in America and at the Bauhaus, that the mission of architecture was in league with larger social forces, to try to shape society, to create spaces for a new and shifting population, a worker population, a middle-class population, and that architecture played a crucial role as a humanistic force, but also as an economic and a force in civil society. And, you know, here in the United States at that time, think about it. Think of all the sort of ambitious projects that were undertaken by the federal government and at many state levels during the Depression to create places, some of it public housing, some of it great public institutions, and there were many corporations as well in league with those government forces to also use architecture as a tool for civic representation, for dignity. But a lot of the Bauhaus movement led to modernism and mid-century modernism. And a lot of the products of that mid-century modernism, I think, began to alienate people from architecture, to begin to feel like cities and places that they had known and loved were becoming more and more filled with glass boxes, corporate boxes, anonymity. And one of the reactions to that was what we saw, in the last few decades, which was the rise of a new form of architecture, very dramatic, spectacular often, works that were like objects of sculpture that capitalized on new advances in engineering, new advances online, and that made many architects really famous. In fact, turned architecture often into kind of an offshoot of sculpture, of the art world. And I think that produced other things which people have reacted to. Some of that is that it has created an architecture of extraordinary wealth. In New York City, where I'm from, the skyline now has been radically shifted. A skyline shared by every New Yorker, in fact, anybody who goes there, radically shifted by a set of buildings. I happen to like some of them, but there are many people who are not happy that those buildings are occupied by extraordinarily wealthy people who now look down on the city from their apartments. And that idea of architecture as something about wealth and exclusivity is a long way from where we started in the 30s and 40s. And I would say that what's now happened is the pendulum has swung again, which is why we're here. And especially among young architects, but also among the people on this stage, there's been a desire to try to redefine architecture and to reconsider some of its role in the public realm. So I want to see how that little, very gross description of what's happening in architecture fits, but also then to get at this question of why architecture matters. What it is in our lives that would be poorer and different without it, and who it's for. So let me begin by talking to you, Michael, from Los Angeles now. And let's just go a little bit through your career. Where did it start?
For me, it really began in the early 1990s when I started my practice, but it was at the same time that the city was really going through a strong crisis in terms of its identity. It was following the Rodney King uprisings in the early 1990s. The city was really pulling itself apart. And a lot of the myths, I would say, the stories that we told ourselves about the city as a kind of connected multicultural city were laid bare. You started to realize that the city was a city of many cultures, but cultures that were largely isolated, siloized, and divided from each other. And in that, I think a number of other architects of my generation started to ask questions about what role architecture would have or could have in the city, and maybe even just as importantly, what role the architect had in a city like that.
So you then got involved with a project on Skid Row that grew out of that Rodney King moment, which was?
Inner City Arts, which was really my first project. Inner City Arts is a public-private school teaching art, but really art is a catalyst for broader educational experiences for children in the Skid Row neighborhood, a place that didn't really have those kinds of opportunities. For me, that project got at this question about those divisions in the city. Where could architecture be? We all believed that architecture could certainly exist and thrive in the places that we knew, the notable places in the city. But I had a real question and really a challenge to myself to see if architecture could happen in the places that were less likely. What kind of effect could architecture have at that more fundamental level?
Yeah. which is another sign that architecture had evacuated itself from some of the places where it used to feel that it belonged.
That's right.
But that project for kids led to a lot of other work on Skid Row, and I wanted to talk about some of the housing you've done as well, because that's been a through line in your career.
It has been. For me, housing is such an important part of really the physical and social trajectory of a city. Housing, I think, is arguably the most important building block of cities, of our urban and civic life. I had always wanted to do housing. In many ways, I had looked at a lot of the same modernists. I was educated at a time when some of the same modernists that were in the video before were part of our education. I thought housing was something that all architects would do, but when I started my practice, nobody was hiring an architect who looked like me to do that kind of housing. Eventually, Skid Row Housing Trust, which is a private nonprofit developer, focused on trying to build housing for formerly homeless individuals, mostly in the Skid Row part of Los Angeles, approached me. And for me, that was an extraordinary moment because it really got at this idea, I thought, of architecture working and serving the individuals who would live there, the community that could potentially be created in a building, but also what role that building would then have to the community, to the city around it.
Yeah. Star was a project with about 106 units.
106 units, all singles, all studio, small apartments. It was one of the first of a new form of housing that was directed at this problem of homelessness. They're permanent supportive housing projects. And what that means is exactly what it says. They're housing units that, for somebody who lives there, they can live there ostensibly for the rest of their lives. It is permanent housing. But supportive services are brought into the building to help support their lives and to help their transformations in a positive way, or to help support those transformations. What was important about it was that because people were actually those residents were going to be living there in that community, it was a way of starting to think about a building that had a lot of the same ideas that we take for granted in the city. It had kitchens in the apartments, but it also had community kitchens, community garden. It had exercise spaces. It had a jogging track around the middle of it.
It also has
kind of microcosm of a city.
Yeah, it also has retail on the floor, so there was
retail on the ground floor.
Isolating.
That's right, and that was to make the building be more a part of the city itself, as opposed to a separate building that only homeless people lived in and that you didn't have any kind of engagement with.
Yeah. I recently wrote about a project you did, which is there on the upper left in Long Beach. So you've continued to do this work. These are smaller projects, some of them on Skid Row, but some of them elsewhere. I guess, and they have some of the same ambition. How do you create homes that are that serve a number of functions for the people who live in them?
That's right.
But that also obviously integrate into their neighborhoods, into the community. Let me ask this question look, there's a lot of debate now around not just homelessness in LA, but the best approaches to homelessness. The current administration is obviously not happy with the idea of permanent supportive housing, the idea that if you house someone, they're no longer homeless. And so what do you think how do you see the impact of a building like this? How do you judge success for yourself when you're thinking about like the Long Beach project?
For me, that the idea of success, or that these projects are making a positive contribution, probably has to happen at a couple of different levels. On the one hand, you're trying to make a place that is a very good place, a very supportive place for the individual, a place that can support the community that's growing there. And that's really a mix of the individual apartments and how they're organized, but a lot of the social and community spaces as well in the buildings. But one of the things that, for me, has been a real point of success is that these projects, as you mentioned, they're all small. They're almost like these little acupunctures across the city. We sometimes think that cities will only change positively through these large, gravitationally changing super projects in the cities. But what I've learned is that with these projects incrementally being built up over time, it almost creates a new map in the city of these community of individuals who have been largely anonymous, who now reside throughout the city in a more integrated way. And people have taken notice of that. The architecture, the aesthetics of the building are very intentional. They're not meant to shy away from a real conversation with the city around it. I want these buildings to be a point of pride that the people who live there can point to, but also that the community asks questions about. What is that? Why is that here? Who's living there? And I think that is a kind of maybe more pervasive underlying success, that you slowly evolve the conversation around who gets to live in the city. What's the right to housing here?
Michael, you've done, like everyone here, lots of different kinds of work. You've done other houses for private clients. You've done public projects. This is a museum in Winnipeg, which we can talk about later. And like Shigeru and Annabelle, those projects are some of the best known works that you've done. But maybe the project for which you've come to be best known at the moment, a recent one, is not a small project.
Famous or infamous?
But which is the 6th Street Bridge in LA, which has become a kind of icon for the city. And which is really interesting because it's both, first of all, you're an architect, so taking over what is often left to engineers. I don't mean that in a derogatory way at all about engineers, but the idea that you wanted to, and you were wanted as the person to do this project, meant that there was some aspiration in this bridge. So maybe you could just briefly describe it and say a little bit of what the effect is.
The 6th Street Bridge is nearly a mile long. It replaces an existing bridge that was there. It's one of a suite of 9 bridges that were built by a former city engineer, Merrill Butler, as a part of the City Beautiful movement that Olmsted was really the spearhead of. It's important because it connects downtown Los Angeles, the Arts District, which if anybody's been in LA recently, they know that it's a incredibly heated, gentrifying part of the city. And on the other side of the river is Boyle Heights, East Los Angeles, which is historically Latino center of the city, really 2 sides, quite literally, of the city. The bridge is very much a conduit for cars, one side to it, another. But I thought that in a city that has been so often been defined by infrastructure, everybody knows the freeways and the highways. The thing about those freeways is that while they created some level of mobility, they also created enormous separation between communities. Infrastructure, in a way, really did cut apart the city. I thought this was an opportunity to think about infrastructure as something that started to stitch the city back together again, that it would be a conduit, but it could be a destination as well, and a symbol. And one of the things that's been so extraordinary is that since the bridge opened, everyone goes there, and they bring whatever is important to them. And whether that's a quinceañera, or it's lowriders, or it's a wedding proposal, or somebody tattooed the bridge on their arm, I thought at that point my job was done. That it has become a part of that public conversation, and the bridge periodically is really used as a kind of public piazza. And I think that idea that infrastructure isn't something to just transit from one place to another, but can be a place where we see each other is an important role that architecture brought to, again, the traditionally engineering-driven infrastructure.
Yeah, and you did mention, but that kind of the way in which you've designed it, which creates that image almost of an unspooling film, which is a kind of wry reference to Hollywood, but also is another form of connection. There's a way in which walking across that, it invites walking across the bridge, which is obviously an architectural move.
That is, and I think that sense of experience, spatial experience, the experience of the arches, is something that people really react to. One of the things that people often ask me, the arches are tilted out slightly, which is a little bit unusual, and the engineers thought that was a little unusual as well. But one of the things it does is it gives you a connection really to the sky. It feels like it embraces what's above you as well. And people have asked me since the bridge has been open, as they often probably ask all of us, what's surprising to you what did you find surprising about the project when it got finished? And a lot of it I expected. I don't think I expected the level of emotional response throughout the city. And that has been really gratifying to see.
So, Shigeru.
Yes.
You have a really interesting career because you've done, again, a real diversity of work. And you've done museum projects, you've done housing things. I've gone to see your house. But you're probably best known for doing relief work and working all over the world with using unexpected but available materials in places that have traditionally been the domain of the UNHCR or other sort of global organizations. But you found a problem with that early on, and you've tackled it, which was an interesting thing for an architect to think of doing in the first place. So take me back. You began in Rwanda?
Yes, 1994. Yes, in Rwanda.
And why? What happened in Rwanda and what brought you there?
Well, after I graduated from Cooper Union, 1984, I went back to Tokyo to start practicing. And after I practiced for 10 years, I was very disappointed about my own profession as architects, because we are mainly working for privileged people who has money and
Privileged
power.
people.
Privileged people who has money and power. Because power and money is invisible, they hire us to make a monument to show off their power to the public. And I was tired of working for them. I'm not saying I'm not interested in making monument, but I was hoping to use my knowledge and experience not only for privilege, but the general public, even people who lost their houses by natural disasters. Especially after the big earthquake, I recognized that people are not killed by earthquake by itself. They are killed by building, collapse of the building. That's our responsibilities. However, when the city has to rebuild, we get more projects.
So I think here on the upper right is a project after the earthquake in Kobe.
Yes, 1995.
And what is it? What are those structures and what are they made out of?
It's made of paper tube, recycled paper tube.
Like a toilet paper tube.
Yeah, toilet. Yeah, that's something like that. This is for the temporary houses. Is it possible to make it bigger?
It is not.
No. This is for the Vietnamese refugees.
You've seen these before, though, I think. So.
Yeah, the foundation is made of beer crates, and the structure is made of recycled paper tube.
So why was that better than what was being done?
Because we are not supposed to build any permanent houses in the park, but they needed it immediately. So I just made it with the student, whatever locally available. But they were living there for 4 years. Then
because it worked.
It works and they're comfortable.
I don't want to linger too long on this, but you moved on from Rwanda, and actually, if I remember, one of the problems was that the emergency relief things that were handed out to people proved useless, basically, that people either sold the materials or they didn't work well.
That's it for the Rwanda,
Yeah.
UNHCR. I was working for UNHCR, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, because the refugee shelter was made by the local trees, and this became very heavy deforestations.
Yeah.
That is why
So you had
UN provided-
deforestation?
Yeah, then United Nations provided aluminum pipes, but they sold them out for money.
Right, so people sold the aluminum pipes and it was denuding the forests.
UN provided them aluminum pipe, but they sold them out.
Right.
Then cut trees again.
So you gave them what instead?
So that's why I proposed to UN to make a shelter out of recycled paper chip, which was available in Kigali, Rwanda.
So it was available materials and it didn't actually harm the environment or promote an economy which was not healthy.
Right.
So let's just go through this quickly, and we're going to come back later to some of your recent work in Ukraine. But if you could mention, so I said you're doing a diversity of work. That project on the lower left is the museum for the Louvre, yes?
No, Pompidou.
In Pompidou, I'm sorry, in Metz, France.
Built
Yeah?
2010. Also, I built the Aspen Art Museum 2000.
I've heard, yeah, right. Yeah. But the building on the lower right is in New Zealand?
Yeah, yes. 2011, there was a big earthquake, and the most important cathedral was destroyed. And I was busy working in Fukushima and other northern Japan after the earthquake, nuclear problem. But also I commuted to New Zealand to build this temporary cathedral, which became permanent.
So what is the point about a temporary thing that becomes permanent?
Well, I believe that many of most of the commercial building made by commercial developer made in concrete are temporary. Because other developer buy the land, destroy the existing building to put new one, so they are temporary. But even the paper tube structure, people loves it, this become permanent. So that is my definition of what is temporary and permanent.
Yeah. Not to mention it's a smaller carbon footprint and less expensive to do and so forth, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So actually, there's a link between longevity and value. The value that people place in those objects, those works. Let's come back to Ukraine later because you're doing a lot of work there. Let me turn to Annabelle for a second. So Annabelle, I just recently wrote about something you did in New York, and fortunately I liked it, so we're sitting here. And I am definitely not alone, which is the Frick collection renovation and expansion. And there is part of it over the garden on 70th Street. Tell me a little bit about this project and how you think of it. We're talking here about sort of public works. Frick is a private institution, but it's a museum, and it's a hugely popular one.
It's a small museum. It's everybody's
With
favorite.
a couple of pictures.
Just a few.
Just a few, yeah.
It's extraordinary, and it's everybody's favorite museum. Why? Because there is a spirit of intimacy in it, and while it's often called a house museum would have you see where the kitchen is and where the family lives. Not so much here. Henry Clay Frick was obviously an industrialist, and he was courageous in hiring Thomas Hastings to build his mansion. In 1934 or 1930, John Russell Pope converted the museum post the death of his wife into a museum. He converted the house into a museum. Nothing much happened after that, except that the Frick, the institution, bought consecutive properties in the eastern direction to eventually add to the museum. In the interim, in the 70s, they had bought these other houses, mansions as we would say today, destroyed them so as to make room for the future. In that empty space, they created a garden. And New Yorkers got used to that garden. New Yorkers started to think of the Frick as a freestanding building. And when the Frick in 2014 or something like that endeavored to actually build in that garden, there was an outcry. You were crying really loud.
Yeah, just a little.
And it became evident how much people cared about this building. They care about the art, they care about the architecture, they care about being a part of this extraordinary, intimate place. The loss of the garden felt like something that couldn't be justified. And the Frick was very smart. They listened.
They hired you.
Well, not in the first instance, but after they thought about it a little bit, they did hire us. And of course, not building in the garden was a very big part of it. So square footage was hard to come by. There was very, very little room, 20 feet in the southern direction at the rear of the existing library, space here and there. I'm German. German housewife comes to mind. We cleaned up. I don't mean to be glib about this, but that really was the attitude. We wanted to make use of the space that existed, give it dignity, and rethink how people circulate in a slightly reconceived space.
Let me interrupt you to say, by the way, this is the entryway that you redid with the stairwell in the that you created at the rear of that image. And here is the auditorium that you moved, what you created by putting it underground, taken what had been a beloved but flawed music room from designed by Pope. By the way, for those of you who don't know, Annabelle was saying, she mentioned these two architects. So in New York, in general, though, in the architecture world, it's like saying that you're following, I don't know, Babe Ruth and Willie Mays, and you're supposed to be up for bat next. This is quite a lineage and a really complicated project to do, right?
It's distinctively not modern. We're talking about a Beaux-Arts context, and that brings with it a completely different architectural vocabulary that entails dimension and proportion. And to operate within that context was very much the name of the game. So reconceptualizing the reception hall within an existing footprint allowed us to, from there, think about how people would circulate in the building to a newly opened second floor.
Yeah, I'm interrupting you because I want to turn to the next project, but I also wanted to say, what you're not saying, because you're speaking as an architect, is the effect of this, which is that a lot of the work that you have done there, and this is an interesting idea for an architect, and for people to think about what makes great architecture, is kind of invisible, and purposely so, to many of the people who go there. This idea that the auditorium is actually an exception to that. But a lot of the work is about making people move about this place, not just more easily, but almost, not just effortlessly, but almost without thinking. That you created a way of, that the space wasn't so much about designing really fancy things on a skyline, but about creating something that you feel without necessarily being aware of it until you enter this. Yeah? Intuitively.
Well, I think it's very important that one of the fundamental things about architecture is that it has to be purposeful. And Michael talked eloquently about that. This is a very different example. Here we are dealing with a building that people are passionate about. And we didn't want to take that away, but we wanted to make make it intuitive for them.
And to preserve what people had loved about it.
Yeah, and
let me move on, because there's a project that I think is really important that you did as well. It's very different. And if we could just speak about this quickly, this is a recycling facility in Sunset Park in Brooklyn on the water on the riverfront for Sims. And what connects a project like this with a project like the Frick in your thinking? And who is this for?
Ultimately, all architecture is for people, and it's made by people. And we must not forget that the dimension of the human body is vitally important for that. So when you're looking at an industrial facility, not many people have done recycling facilities by now, more frequently, but when we did this, that was the first sort of prominent recycling facility, and it entailed people working there. So we wanted to make spaces within which one could not feel overwhelmed by the sheer industrial size.
Who is one?
One are the 90 people who are sorters who stand at the machines.
Yeah, but it's not only, right? Because the project has been, I liked it too, so I'm going to take credit for writing how much I liked it. It's very beautiful, and it's become a place to which people go to see the building. So it has another purpose too, doesn't it? It is a public kind of statement about recycling and about the dignity of that labor and about the way that building sits even.
Well, it's also about the relationship to the city, to the New York harbor, to nature, to the sky. The sky is very important in my head. And how the reflectivity of light. And I think that what you're saying is correct. To me, the recycling facility is the same as the Frick, because the same kind of thinking about bringing dignity to the people using it is a fundamental aspect of it. In my mind, a building is great, and it's that much better by the time that people use it. And so when we're thinking about how we make space, we think about how you move around in it, how you experience it, how it lasts for a long time, and how a building takes responsibility for shaping our existence within it.
Yeah. Let me broaden this conversation back out for a second, because I think you've raised this question too, Annabelle, in answering my query about who it's for. Like, I'll ask you, Shigeru, but really we should talk among ourselves. Like, what is your idea of what a successful project is? Success must have different meanings. It must be something that is, first of all, personal. It may have to do with your practice and your business. It may have to do with some problems you've solved in the course of undertaking a project. But we've been talking about public projects. How does one measure success in architecture? Shigeru.
I think there are two things. One is if I always feel successful if the community pleased with the design and solution. Secondly, the projects train me as a good lesson, good training myself to go to next step. So the publicly it has to be well accepted by its community. Then it has to be some good training for myself for next step. That's for me successful projects.
So you measure it by how the clients, essentially, the users, feel about it, as well as whether it provides you with some way of moving forward with an idea that you have?
Yes, always the project give me hard time, train me for the next step, so that I really prefer difficult project.
That's interesting. Annabelle, what do you think?
Well, it goes in two ways. I think it's not wrong to say that if people like it, it reaches something. Architecture is a service. It's not just the mother of all arts. Well, it is.
We could just close right now.
Yeah. So that leaves us about 15 minutes if you guys have any questions, or I think we've proved our point. Yeah.
I do think that as an architect, you have to achieve on both of those levels.
Yeah.
You're not just an architect because it's not just a beautiful thing, but it's so much more than that. It fits in a long history, there's rigor, there's so much to think and do. But ultimately, it serves a purpose.
Yeah, but so let me ask about that. Because look, first of all, people could be pleased by, crappy knockoff ranch houses that are in
And they are.
And they are. So whether you would also consider that, a success would be a different question. I mean, so the Shigeru earlier had said, it had to do with the longevity. The longevity was a reflection of this. I don't know whether, Michael, you would measure on some level the success of STAR or some of the other permanent supportive housing projects in terms of how the people who live there do in their lives, or how much it answers the question of homelessness in LA.
Absolutely there are metrics to success, and often we're asked about exactly those quantitative understandings of whether the project is performing in whatever way. Is it housing a certain number of people? Is it having an effect for the institution? But I think in some ways, ultimately, the success for me I think it's antithetical in a way to it's contrary to the way that we often think about the architect's relationship to what they've made. Success for me is when in a way, the ownership of the project, of the building, gets transferred from the architect, from the creator, to whoever's using it. And in the case of the housing projects, the success for me there is that, of course, the buildings look like buildings that I've done. So somehow you're always written into the equation. But ultimately, it's whether that community thrives in the building, and again, just as importantly, maybe even more importantly, the city embraces it and it becomes a part of the daily existence of the city. It's not held apart.
Is there perhaps an ethos that's fundamental to the design that's legible, that's experiential? It's not the rule of law, but it is the deep thinking that goes into a housing project like that. I really appreciated that you said that you didn't want it to be just one of many houses, but that it took identity. And in some ways, the spectrum of taking identity is very, very large. The intelligence of using the paper tubes, to me, is a fantastically intelligent and absolutely beautiful idea. Intelligence being a significant part of that. And that is absorbed by the people using, experiencing, and partaking in that design.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking earlier about the idea that there was a public sense of public responsibility about generations ago around public places, whether they were public libraries or train stations or public housing projects. And now I think the metrics have become difficult for people to understand. Why should any extra money be spent on a housing project for formerly homeless when that money could be used for something less architecturally distinctive, but maybe another apartment? I remember the first project that I wrote about in this role at the Times was about a project in the South Bronx called Via Verde, which had a lot of bells and whistles around health and climate consciousness. I went back repeatedly to see how that is done. And actually, it's been hugely successful, precisely because the premium placed on that, and it's what you were saying about your own work in New Zealand and elsewhere, gave the people who live there a sense of investment in that project. And so that got paid off at least a few times over the years.
But if we bring everything to if money is information and spending the least you can possibly get away with, you're likely to have something that is somewhat impoverished. If you do the opposite, just heaping money on top of everything, the same negative effect goes into play. In my mind, the notion of common sense, middle ground, applied intelligence to what makes sense versus what is a privilege is a very important responsibility of the architect, I think.
I think we can. I think it's partially the role of the architect to insist and demand that the things that we make, the contributions that we're a part of, other architects are a part of in the city, are contributing. Yeah. When we first started to do that housing, to your point, I used to get the same questions from people, including some people who used to be friends of mine. They would say, why are you working so hard to try to make something look that great for that community? It used to infuriate me, not only because they were saying that about the people who are living in that housing or the project itself, but because each of these pieces are ultimately are part of our ecosystem. It's, the things, we're all living in this aquarium together in the city, and whatever you put in the tank is all a part of what we eat and drink and live with. Why would you want to make anything in your ecosystem not contribute? Why would you want to make it bad? Why would you make it ugly? Why wouldn't you want to make something that was really of benefit and was as beautiful as it could be, no matter who it was serving?
I mean, that's true, and it sounds right. But and one of the things, Shigeru, about your work, and especially the paper stuff, is there's an economy to it that's also extraordinarily appealing. There's something about it that's, you just do it, it's beautiful, it works, it's cheap, in the best sense. But one of the problems with so much, and this is a broader conversation, right, we're having certainly as a nation, but not just here. We've become, a society that has created so many obstacles, so many systems and bureaucracies, so many, not just rules and regulations, but just things that create costs and take time and have changed this equation of what investing. Architecture is just, in a sense, the outcome of that. But it's hard to separate it, right, from what is often perceived as, crazy sums of money to build, let's say, a unit of housing for a formerly homeless resident, or some of the relief work that you've talked about and the UNHCR does is preposterously expensive, inexplicably so. I don't really know where I'm going with that, except that I think it has certainly increased the sense of distrust and fear of change, of fear of making investments that might not pay off. I mean, it's interesting, right? Like that moment of modernism coming in and becoming kind of ubiquitous coincided with essentially a preservation movement. The knocking down of Penn Station was part of that. And that was a new thing, a fear that what was coming next would not be better, but worse. And we still live in that moment in some ways.
I think it's really important to remember that architecture is not about I like it or I don't like it, but rather is about what does it do, why is it there in the first place, and what are the fundamental values to it. And I think especially being here in Aspen, the centering it on humanity and humanitarian values, dignity, etc., are what should be at the very foundation of architecture. And so the intelligence that produces both dialogue but also ultimately material product in the face of climate change crisis, we have to think about building differently. It's patently obvious.
Which leads me back to Ukraine.
Yes.
So Shigeru,
I think we can make spaces, housing inexpensively, like one we did in the private spaces for Ukrainian refugees in the gymnasium with the paper tube and partitions.
Yeah, just step back a little bit, and maybe we have some images of the Ukraine work that you've been doing. So first of all, when did you start to do some work in Ukraine, and why?
Week after the Russia attacked 3 years ago.
Okay.
Because I saw the million of the people moving to Poland without any privacy. They stayed in gymnasium. So I provided the partition system with paper tube, locally produced, donated and built with student. The picture light left on top. We did
these were for displaced people from the bombings.
Refugees. And we made a 2,000 unit all over the Poland, Ukraine, Slovakia, and Paris. Then we started working with the Polish university, making affordable housing by student. It's the system made with styrofoam, with plastic painted. It's lightweight, can be built by student easily. So we are preparing for the affordable housing after the wars.
Who are you working with on that?
With the local university in Poland.
Okay, but the Ukrainian government is somewhat involved, or no?
We are NGO, non-government organization. If we work with the government, it's going to be more complicated.
Yeah. As I was saying. So, but you're doing more than that as well. I think on the lower right, there's an image of, is this a hospital you're doing?
Yes, that was in Lviv, in the west side of Ukraine, because the west side is rather safe. Many injured people come to the hospital, so overcapacity. I was asked by mayor to build the hospital with 250,000 square feet in locally available timber, using the EU building regulation, because Ukraine want to be part of the EU.
Right.
And according to current building regulation in EU, Ukraine, they cannot build such a hospital in timber. But using EU building regulation, we can do it. So that the mayor asked me to make a hospital of such a size with local timber and EU.
So actually the material itself has symbolic value and political message behind it.
Yes.
Is the cost of doing this less than it, because hospitals generally are unimaginably expensive things?
Yeah, but this is the cross-laminated timbers produced. They have biggest factory in East Europe. They used to export to US and Canada, but they cannot. So they want to use the locally available material, which was could not to export now. So to make hospital.
Shigeru, in the end, obviously you're extremely involved in and proud of the Aspen and the Mets and other projects like that. But do you take the most satisfaction from doing this kind of work, personally?
Yes, because each project give me the new idea for the next step. So as I said, even Aspen Art Museum, I spent nearly 10 years redesigning. So always project giving me hard time is really good project.
So you're returning to a painful place in Aspen?
No.
What about you guys? Like, do you feel, are there any particular projects? Annabelle, you just finished the National Gallery in London. And Michael, we did the bridge. I'm not giving you your own answers. But are there sort of projects that that hold a special place in your heart? Is it like children? You're just not going to say it in public?
Yeah, exactly. At
Well,
least not in public. I mean, for me, and this is not a way of dodging the question, but it's hard to say that any one project fully stands for what as an architect you're trying to do. Of course, there are certain projects that meant something to you probably personally at a particular moment, or that, as Shigeru was saying, led you to the next thing. For me, all of the projects really are completely intertwined with each other. What we learn on one project, we bring to another. And I think that's unusual for many people to, when they think about an architecture office, when they come to our office, one of the things that's really surprising to people, we make a lot of big three-dimensional physical models as a design tool. And when you walk through the office, there isn't a housing department. There's not a wealthy person's housing area. There's not a museum area. The models are all intertwined. And that's not set decoration. That's really the way that we work. And so I think that's to me what's important, is that, at least personally, that we've been able to find a way to use architecture in its greatest capacity. We live in a world where specialties have become more and more the concentration, I think, in terms of how people act in the world. And of course, if you have to have brain surgery, you probably want a specialist. But architecture is dealing with such a complex range of issues: political, social, physical, contextual. You have to be able to work across all of them. And that means that your ability to choreograph all of those influences is really the measure often of the success of any individual project. You know, I think with both Annabelle and Shigeru, it's incredibly impressive to me how many different types of projects they're involved in and how many different places that they're working in. And that is really, I think, connected to the kind of capability of architecture to see very broadly, to burrow into the details, but to see how they work across a wide range of
Thank you,
issues.
Mike. We have to end, but say, please.
I would just add that if architecture is my tool, my vocabulary, then that's incredibly dear to me, and it connects me to everybody that I work with in terms of how you translate what resides in your head to paper and eventually building. But maybe more than anything is the dialogue, the far-ranging dialogue with the client. There are projects where the client goes missing. And they're really very, very difficult to do because we work with specificity. I don't think any one project I have done looks the same as another, and they're fundamentally different. But what they have in common is that specificity. And for that to find the right expression, the right articulation, the thing that you hold on to, it's material, it's real, it's concrete. And I don't think about materials in the first place, but rather what it does for you. And so I need to talk to you.
Yeah. It's the places we live. Listen, thank you, guys. This has been super, super fun. I'm really grateful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.